My name's Mark Carter, and 6 months ago, my wife sat across from me at the breakfast table and told me she wanted a divorce, like she was asking me to pass the salt. What she didn't know was that I'd been waiting for that moment. Watching. Planning. You see, when a woman cheats and thinks you're too blind to notice, she makes one fatal mistake. She underestimates your silence. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about strategy, control, and the cold satisfaction of taking your life back, piece by piece. You want to know how I handled it? Let me tell you everything. It was a quiet Monday morning. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in one hand, newspaper in the other, savoring the final few minutes before heading off to work. The sun streamed in through the window, and the smell of fresh toast still lingered in the air. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Until it wasn't. Lena stood across from me, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes locked onto mine with a coldness I hadn't seen before, or maybe I had, and just didn't want to admit it. "Mark," she said firmly, "could you put the newspaper down? I need to talk to you." I lowered the paper slightly, raising an eyebrow. "What's up?" "I'm leaving you. I want a divorce." There it was, dropped like a grenade onto the breakfast table. I blinked once, twice. "That all?" I asked, flipping to the sports section like she'd just reminded me to take the trash out. She slammed her palm on the table. "I'm serious, damn it." I looked at her calmly. "So am I." I folded the paper and set it aside. "You haven't been much of a wife for over a year, Lena. Honestly, I'm glad you're going. Saves me the trouble." I stood up and walked into my home office. No yelling, no pleading, just cold clarity. I opened a drawer, pulled out a notepad, a pen, and a blank envelope, then returned to the kitchen where she stood, stunned and speechless. I sat back down and started writing. "Terrence, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank God she's leaving me. If you're lucky, maybe this lottery ticket will be enough to keep her loyal. You're going to need every bit of luck you can get. A very grateful Mark." I tucked last night's and used lottery ticket into the envelope, sealed it, and handed it to Lena. "When you see him," I said flatly, "give him this." She took it slowly, staring at me like she'd just seen a ghost. You knew?" I chuckled. "You think I'm an idiot? Just because I kept quiet doesn't mean I didn't know. Maybe I should mail it myself. I don't trust you not to rip it open and toss it." I snatched the envelope back and set it on the counter. "Anyway, since you're leaving, you'll need to be out of the house soon. The sooner the better." "I'm not moving out," she snapped. "This is my house too. I'm not handing it over so you can bring your little girlfriend in." I didn't even answer. I poured fresh coffee into my travel mug, screwed the lid on, and walked out the door. On the way to work, I made my first stop, the bank. I closed every joint account, transferred the funds into a new account under my name only, and emptied our safe deposit box. Then I drove across town to a different bank and opened all new accounts, just in case. After that, I canceled every shared credit card we had and requested new ones. In less than 3 hours, I had cut Lena off from every financial tie she had to me. And I wasn't done yet. That evening, I stayed late at the office and grabbed dinner and drinks with Nina, my executive assistant. We'd worked together for years, but tonight felt different. As we laughed over drinks, I casually mentioned I was back on the market. She smiled and said, "To hell with my sister. If you're single again, I want to be first in line." It caught me off guard. Nina had always been strictly professional, but there was something in her eyes I hadn't noticed, or maybe had ignored, for far too long. I smiled back. "All right then," I said, half joking. "Your sister moves to second place. You're up." She leaned in slightly. "I'm not joking, Mark. I'm dead serious." And for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir in me. Not bitterness, not anger, something else. Possibility. But I still had unfinished business with Lena. And I knew, deep down, the next move had to be mine. By the time I pulled into the office parking lot the next morning, I had already made up my mind. This wasn't going to be a quiet, civil split. Lena thought she had the upper hand, springing the divorce on me like she was doing me a favor. But if there was one thing I hated more than betrayal, it was being underestimated. While sipping my second coffee of the day, I sat at my desk and started compiling a checklist. Not an emotional one. There was no space for that anymore. This was war, and I planned to win it clean, cold, and legal. First, I contacted the utility companies and removed her name from every account. Water, power, internet, done. Then, I checked the home insurance and made a few subtle changes. Nothing too flashy. just enough to remind her that this house was under my name, maintained by my salary, and protected by my planning. Next came the lawyer. Eric and I had been friends since we were kids. He'd helped me with some real estate paperwork a few years back, and I knew he specialized in family law now. When he picked up, his voice was cheerful as ever, but it fell quiet the second I told him why I was calling. "Lena," he asked, stunned. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," I replied. "She wants out. She's been cheating. I've got evidence, and I'm ready to move." He let out a low whistle. "I always liked her, man. Sally did too. But all right, I'll make the calls in the morning and draft the papers. Come by at lunch to sign them. Oh, and one more thing," I added. "I want a restraining order." Eric paused. "You expecting trouble?" I hesitated. She didn't threaten me directly, but I want to play it safe. Say, her boyfriend, Terrence, made some comments. Said he'd deal with me if I made life hard for her. Eric didn't even question it. "Got it. I'll make it stick. There'll be a hearing within 10 days to make it permanent, but we can get a temporary one fast. Do you want her served at home or work?" "Work," I said without missing a beat. "Let her feel the sting. I want her caught off guard." "Savage," Eric chuckled. "I like it." After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair. My heart should have been racing. Divorce, court, restraining orders. But instead, I felt calm, focused. It was like flipping a switch. The moment Lena gave up on our marriage, I gave up pretending to care. Later that day, I had lunch with Nina again. She wore a fitted navy blue blouse, her hair pulled back, her smile just a little bolder than the day before. "You look lighter today," she said, sipping her iced tea. "Maybe I am," I replied. "I've got a plan now. Everything's in motion." "And your wife?" she asked carefully. "She's about to learn what happens when you think you can burn down someone's life without consequences." Nina leaned in slightly, her voice low. "What are you going to do?" I told her everything. How I'd closed the accounts, canceled her cards, filed for divorce, and planned to serve her at work. Her eyes widened, but there was admiration there too. "You didn't waste any time." "Why should I?" I shrugged. She made her move. Now I'm making mine. There was a moment of silence between us, the kind that feels charged. Then Nina said, "What about us?" "Us?" I echoed, a little surprised. "I meant what I said yesterday. I'm interested in seeing where this goes." I looked into her eyes. She wasn't playing around. "There's still paperwork to handle. Legal stuff. Technically, I'm still married." She nodded. "Then let's take our time. But I want to be there when you're ready." The thought of starting something new while Lena was still under the same roof should have felt messy, but it didn't. It felt like hope. When I got home that night, the house was quiet. Lena's car was in the driveway, but I didn't see her. I assumed she was in one of the bedrooms sulking or planning her next move. Good. Let her stew. Let her wonder what I was up to. I spent the evening boxing up her things, neatly, methodically, labeling each one and stacking them in the garage. She wanted to leave? I'd make sure the exit was as efficient as possible. By the time I was done, the house felt cleaner, lighter. I stood in the kitchen, beer in hand, looking around like I was seeing my home for the first time in years. And for once, I felt peace. Not revenge, not rage, just clarity. Because tomorrow, everything would start to shift, and I was going to make damn sure I stayed one step ahead. People always ask, how could you stay with someone who was cheating on you? The truth is, it's easier than you think, once love dies and indifference takes its place. I found out about Lena's affair almost a year and a half ago. It wasn't a dramatic discovery. No lipstick on the collar. No strange texts. It started with a simple phone call from a friend of mine, Tony. He was out near the interstate and saw Lena pulling into a motel parking lot with a man. She wasn't there for a business meeting. "I thought you should know," Tony had said. She was holding his hand. I remember sitting in my car after the call, engine still running, just empty. Then I shut the car off, went inside, poured myself a drink, and started planning. The next day, I hired a private investigator. Not out of jealousy, out of strategy. I wanted proof, clean legal proof. The PI followed her for a week and delivered everything. Photos, times, names, even receipts. The man was Terrence, some mid-level nobody she met through a coworker. They'd been meeting in cheap motels, usually on Wednesdays and Fridays. I never confronted her. Not right away. What would have been the point? We live in a no-fault divorce state. No matter how much she screwed around, it wouldn't make a difference in court. Everything would be split 50-50ths. House, savings, assets, even the damn lawnmower. I would have had to sell the house I built, give her half, and start over in some dingy apartment while she kept living comfortably on my money. So I stayed quiet. I let her cook, clean, fold my laundry. I let her pretend. Hell, I even kept sleeping with her. Not because I wanted her. Not anymore. But because I wanted her to believe she still had control. To be fair, things between us in bed changed. I stopped calling it making love. It was just mechanical. I never touched her on the days she was with him. Somehow, knowing what she was doing those nights made my skin crawl. But on the other days, I played the role. The dutiful husband. The one she could keep lying to. Looking back, I don't think Terrence was the first. Over the 10 years we'd been married, there were signs, moods Lena would fall into every couple of years. Cold, distant, overly defensive. Each time, I chalked it up to stress or hormones. But after everything, I started connecting the dots. There were at least 3 other stretches where she acted exactly like she had since starting this thing with Terrence. I had no proof, but my gut told me the truth. This wasn't her first time. Just the first time she thought she'd trade up. So why didn't I leave her sooner? Simple. Because I thought she'd come back. Because I thought, on some foolish level, that I still mattered to her. And because I wanted to be the one who decided when it was over. Turns out, that moment came over toast and coffee. Nina asked me the same thing when I told her everything over lunch that week. She looked at me like I was some kind of mystery she couldn't quite solve. You stayed with her for 18 months? Knowing she was cheating. I nodded. I had too much to lose. But how did you sleep next to her every night? I gave her a half smile. Because love turns to hate, and hate eventually turns into something worse, indifference. And once you stop feeling anything at all, it's easier to let the game play out. She didn't judge me. That was the thing about Nina. She listened. And she made me feel like I wasn't crazy for holding my cards close. But she also reminded me of something important. If Lena filed for divorce first, she'd control the narrative. And control the process. She could claim anything, emotional abuse, cruelty, even violence, and spin it all in her favor. Mark, Nina said, you need to act first. Set the pace. Make her react, not the other way around. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Lena was in the guest room now, and the house was eerily silent. But my mind was racing. Nina was right. If Lena filed first, I could be the one kicked out of the house. A judge might issue a temporary order giving her possession until the hearing. She could lie, play the victim. Hell, she might already be planning it. I couldn't afford to wait. I had waited long enough. I turned over, grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and stared at the screen. Tomorrow, Eric would have the papers ready. The restraining order. The divorce filing. All of it. By Thursday, Lena would be served, at work, in front of her colleagues. No secrets. No soft landings. And after that, I'd start taking back what was mine. Piece by calculated piece. The next morning, I arrived at Eric's office just before noon. He was already waiting with a thick folder in hand and 2 cups of black coffee, one for each of us. We sat across from each other at a conference table tucked away in a quiet corner of his firm. The air was heavy with anticipation. I've drafted everything, he said, sliding the folder toward me. Divorce petition, motion for temporary restraining order, asset freeze request. All clean. All tight. I opened the folder and began reading. My name. Her name. Grounds. Irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. The words didn't sting. They felt sterile, surgical. Exactly what I wanted. Once you sign, I'll file it this afternoon, Eric continued. She'll be served by 10 tomorrow morning, just like you asked. Perfect, I said, taking the pen and scribbling my signature on the dotted lines. It felt like signing a death certificate, but the corpse was a lie of a marriage I'd already buried in my mind. One more thing, I added. I want the locks changed the minute she's served. I'll be home, ready to call the locksmith. Eric raised an eyebrow. You're playing this like chess. No, I said, finishing my coffee. I'm playing it like war. We shared a quiet lunch at a diner down the street, where we talked more like old friends than lawyer and client. As I bit into my sandwich, Eric glanced at me and asked, any chance this gets amicable? I laughed. You think someone who's been lying to my face for years is going to turn around and shake hands? No, I'm going to bury her with bureaucracy, and I'm not even sorry about it. That evening, I went home and double-checked everything. Lena was still staying in the guest room. We hadn't exchanged a single word in 2 days, and I planned to keep it that way. I ate my dinner in silence, then spent the rest of the evening boxing up more of her things. It wasn't about being petty. It was about control, order, setting the tone. The next morning, I left early. I grabbed breakfast at the little bed-and-breakfast cafe downtown, the kind of place where everyone knew your name. The waitress, Nadia, raised an eyebrow when she saw me sitting alone again. "Where's your wife?" she asked casually, pouring my coffee. "Not my wife much longer," I said. "We're splitting up." "I see," she replied, sliding the sugar over to me. "Well, my number's on the back of the receipt. Not the restaurant's. Mine." I stared at her, stunned. That made 3 women in less than a week who had made a move. 3. And yet Lena had thrown me away like yesterday's garbage. I checked my watch. 9:58 a.m. Almost showtime. I finished my coffee and drove home, adrenaline rising in my chest like a slow burn. At exactly 10:15, my phone rang. It was Eric. "It's done," he said. "She's been served." "Thanks," I replied, already dialing the locksmith. He arrived within 30 minutes and worked fast. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the old locks fall away and new ones take their place. Every click of the drill sounded like justice. By 11:30, it was finished. I handed over a fat tip and walked back into my home, with a sense of finality I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to wait long. At 12:07 p.m., Lena's car screeched into the driveway like a scene from a low-budget soap opera. I stayed behind the blinds as she stomped toward the front door, spotting the large cardboard sign I'd taped to the garage. "Lena, all your things are in the garage." She froze. Then she tried her key. It didn't work. She rang the doorbell. Once, twice, 5 times. I didn't answer. Eventually, she left, her pride bruised, her face flushed. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't even check the caller ID. "You're a complete A****, she snapped. "Did you really have to humiliate me in front of my coworkers like that?" "Better than letting you humiliate me in front of mine," I replied. "All your stuff is in the garage. If something's missing, make a list." "You're being ridiculous," she hissed. "No, Lena. I'm being fair. You want it out. You got it. Now live with it." She cursed under her breath, but I was already hanging up. Then I picked up my phone again, this time to call everyone on my list. Friends, family, mutual connections. I told them what happened. I told them the truth. About the affair, the lies, the divorce. I wasn't going to let her play the victim. She might have lit the match, but I was the one holding the gasoline. That night, I came home later than usual. I'd stayed at the office tying up loose ends, mostly to give Lena time to process the bomb I dropped on her life. I half expected to find the house empty, maybe a goodbye note on the counter or a string of text messages begging for mercy. But no, she was still there, sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by scattered papers, probably divorce documents, maybe her version of a plan. She looked up when I walked in, eyes glassy but sharp. "You changed the locks," she said flatly. "I did. You can't just lock me out of my own house, Mark." I cracked open a beer and leaned against the fridge. "Actually, I can. There's a restraining order in place, and you violated it when you tried to force your way in earlier. Lucky for you, I didn't call the cops yet." She crossed her arms. "This is my house too. I'm not going anywhere. If you want to avoid me so badly, you can move out." I took a sip and let the silence stretch. Then I walked over, pulled out a chair across from her, and sat down. "You think this is going to go your way, don't you?" I asked. "You think you'll get the house, the car, half the money, maybe even a sob story to tell your friends. But I've got news for you, Lena. This won't be a clean getaway." Her jaw tightened. "We live in a no-fault state. Everything gets split 50-50ths. You know that." "Oh, I know," I said with a smirk. "But I also know how to make it painful. You want the coffee table? Guess what? I want it too. The couch? Sentimental value. The blender? I'll fight you for the damn blender if it means bleeding your lawyer dry." She stared at me like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. And maybe she didn't. Maybe the version of me she thought she knew, the quiet, reliable, forgiving husband, had finally died the moment she handed herself over to Terrence. "You're doing all this out of spite," she said coldly. "No," I replied. "I'm doing it out of principle." She turned away, but not before I saw it. That flicker of guilt in her eyes. The kind of guilt that only surfaces when a cheater realizes their fallback plan isn't going to roll over and die quietly. You didn't even flinch when I told you I wanted a divorce, she said after a while. You didn't ask why. You didn't ask if we could fix it. You just let me go. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. That's because I already let you go, Lena. A long time ago. The day I found out you were screwing Terrence in some discount motel off I-95. That was the day our marriage ended. You just didn't know it yet. She blinked hard, and for a split second, I thought she might break. But she didn't. She straightened her shoulders, grabbed the pile of papers, and stood up. This conversation is over. You're right, I said calmly. There's nothing left to say. Move your stuff into the guest room and stay the hell out of mine. We're not playing house anymore. Without another word, she left the kitchen, heels clicking down the hallway like gunshots echoing through a war zone. I finished my beer, tossed the bottle in the recycling bin, and went upstairs. The master bedroom, my bedroom, felt colder than usual, but I didn't mind. Cold was better than fake warmth. Cold was honest. I changed the sheets, not out of cleanliness, but out of symbolism. New bedding, new boundaries, new rules. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The next morning, I was up before sunrise. I didn't wait for Lena to wake up. I got dressed, made myself breakfast, and slipped out the door without a sound. At the cafe, Nadia gave me a curious look when I walked in. Rough night? She asked, setting down my usual order. I just smiled. You could say that. She didn't press further. But when she handed me the bill, her phone number was still scribbled on the back, underlined this time. When I got to work, Nina was already at her desk, typing something up with that focused look I'd always admired. She glanced up and smiled, then said, "So, how'd it go?" I gave her a look that said you have no idea, then leaned in. She's still in the house, I muttered. But not for long. I've got everything in place. It's just a matter of time now. Nina nodded, then lowered her voice. You want my advice? Always. Don't stop now. Keep the pressure on. People like her. They fold when they realize they're not the ones in control anymore. And she was right. The house might still be full of Lena's things. But the power? That was already mine. Friday morning, I woke up before Lena, as usual. I slipped out of bed, got dressed in silence, and left the house without a word. I headed back to that little cafe downtown. At this point, it was less about the food and more about the ritual, hot coffee, a quiet corner, and a clear head before battle. I made a list on a napkin while I ate. Names of people I needed to call. Friends, family, co-workers, mutual acquaintances. I wasn't going to wait for Lena to twist the story into some victim tale where I was the cold, distant husband and she was the poor woman who just fell in love. No, I was going to get ahead of it. By the time I reached the office, I had already made 6 calls. 2 of them were shocked. The others less so. One of our mutual friends, Greg, let out a sigh and said, "So you finally caught her, huh?" Another said, "Honestly, I always assumed you had some sort of open marriage." She was never subtle about being out with someone. That stung more than I expected, but it only hardened my resolve. I met Eric for lunch, and we finalized everything. The restraining order was scheduled for a hearing on Monday, but in the meantime, it was active and enforceable. I reminded him that Lena had already tried to re-enter the house, and hinted that she might try again. He nodded, serious. "We'll be ready if she does. Just call the cops immediately. The footage from your new security system will do the rest." That evening, I returned home, and for a moment, I thought maybe Lena had gotten the message. The house was quiet. Her car was gone. I didn't see her. I assumed she had taken the hint and left voluntarily. I was wrong. She waited until I was in the shower. The next thing I knew, I heard a crash, glass shattering. I stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped a towel around my waist, and ran downstairs. The kitchen looked like a war zone. Plates smashed on the floor, glasses in pieces. A chair knocked over. In the living room, 2 lamps had been thrown against the wall, shattered beyond repair. And there, in the hallway, stood Lena, wild-eyed, breathing hard, dumping my clothes from the upstairs laundry basket onto the floor. Then she did it. She squatted and urinated all over them. I froze. For a second, I couldn't even move. I just stood there, watching the woman I once loved desecrate my belongings like some rabid animal. And the whole time, the security camera mounted in the corner blinked silently, capturing every second of her meltdown. She saw it too, realized a little too late what she'd just done. "You bastard," she hissed. "You ruined everything." I didn't respond. I walked back upstairs, dried off, got dressed, and called Eric. "Get the police," I said. She broke in and trashed the place. "I've got it all on video." 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived, took photos, reviewed the footage, and arrested her on the spot. She screamed and cursed the entire time, like a banshee with a law degree. But they cuffed her anyway and hauled her off, charged with violating a restraining order and willful destruction of property. On Monday, we stood before a judge. He watched the video twice, silently, before turning to Lena with a look of complete disgust. "The restraining order is now permanent," he ruled. "Additionally, you are to reimburse Mr. Carter for the damages, including the cost of replacing the destroyed items, dry cleaning his clothing, and the deep cleaning of the master bedroom." He gave her 10 days to comply, or face jail time for contempt of court. Just to twist the knife a little deeper, I hired the most expensive cleaning company in the state. They quoted me double what I expected, but I didn't blink. I sent Lena the invoice with a sticky note attached, worth every penny. To my disappointment, she somehow scraped the money together. I never got to see her do time. Maybe she begged Terrence for help. Maybe she sold jewelry or borrowed from her parents. It didn't matter. She was unraveling, and I was still 3 moves ahead. The weekend came, and for the first time in months, I felt light. Nina and I went out to dinner Friday night. She wore a black dress that hugged her figure just enough to make me forget the week I'd had. We danced. We laughed. We shared a long, slow kiss outside the restaurant. Saturday, we went to the lake for a picnic. Just the 2 of us. No drama. No lies. No broken glass or screaming matches. By Sunday evening, I realized something. Lena may have tried to ruin my life, but all she really did was set me free. The week after Lena's courtroom disaster was strangely peaceful. The air in the house felt different. Cleaner. Quieter. I found myself waking up without a knot in my chest. No eggshells to tiptoe around. No shouting matches waiting to erupt. Just the low hum of solitude, and for once, it felt good. Nina and I kept things slow. No rushing. No crossing lines. But something real was forming between us, something honest. After everything I'd endured, that honesty felt like gold. Still, I hadn't forgotten the mission. The restraining order hearing may have ended in my favor, but the divorce itself was still moving through the system. I knew Lena wasn't finished trying to twist the narrative. That woman could fall into a puddle of gasoline and still try to convince the fire department I lit the match. But I'd come too far to let her rewrite history. When the court date for the divorce came, I was ready. Eric stood beside me like a soldier heading into battle, and we faced the judge with a mountain of evidence. Photos, financial records, the security footage, everything. Lena tried to play the victim at first, claiming she had been emotionally neglected and pushed into Terrence's arms. But the judge didn't buy it. Neither did his cousin. Yeah, turns out, the judge who oversaw our divorce proceedings was the cousin of the one who handled the restraining order. Apparently, they'd had a few conversations about the woman who peed on her husband's clothes. That reputation stuck. Lucky me. The divorce was finalized 6 months after I filed. Standard 50-50 split, but with a few twists. I refinanced the house and bought out Lena's share. What she didn't know, and what the court never found out, was that I had been quietly funneling money into a separate account for over a year. It had started as a surprise anniversary gift fund. A round-the-world trip I never got to plan. Turns out, betrayal is a lot cheaper when you're the one doing the leaving. There were also 2 certificates of deposit in the safe that she didn't know existed. Bonuses from my last 2 fiscal years, untouched and invisible. Since she hadn't claimed them, they weren't considered part of the split. And then came the alimony. She asked for $500 a week. The judge gave her $100. For 2 years. Or until she remarried. Eric nearly laughed out loud in court. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps, watching Lena walk to her car alone. No Terrence in sight. Her shoulders slumped. Her once flawless hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked smaller, diminished. 7 months passed. Word around town was that Lena had moved back in with her parents. Her relationship with Terrence had fizzled. I wasn't surprised. What started in secrecy and lies never survives the daylight. 8 months post-divorce, I found myself sitting at the bar in the Hilton downtown, beer in one hand, steak sandwich in the other. It had been a long day, and I was just enjoying the stillness when someone slid into the stool next to me. "Can I buy you a beer?" I turned slowly. It was him. Terrence. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him in a photo. tired, aged beyond his years. He signaled to the bartender and ordered us both around. We sat in silence for a minute while he peeled the label off his bottle. Little shreds of paper collected between us like ash from a dying fire. "I didn't mean to screw things up for you," he said finally, still not looking at me. "The night I met her, she didn't have a wedding ring. She was laughing, dancing with her coworkers. She didn't act married. I didn't say a word, just listened. She told me she lived with her sick mother. Said she could only go out when someone else was home to take care of her. I bought it. All of it. He told me how he fell for her, how they started hooking up in motels, how he was planning to propose, and then how he found out the truth from a friend who had seen her do the same thing 2 years earlier with another guy. And then my letter arrived. He sat on it for a week, confronted her, and everything unraveled. She claimed I was abusive, that I drank, that I threatened to kill her if she left me. Of course, I didn't believe her, he said, but I let her move in for a while anyway. Mostly because, well, the sex was good. But once the divorce went through, she started talking about marriage again. That's when I ended it. He finished his beer and reached into his pocket. "Here," he said, sliding a cashier's check across the bar. "This is your half. That lottery ticket you gave me, it hit." I waited until the divorce was over so she couldn't touch it. I looked down at the check. It was a lot of money. I stared at him, speechless, as he stood up. "See you around, Mark." And just like that, he was gone. I looked down at the check again. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. For the first time in years, the universe had finally done something right. I stayed at the bar long after Terrence left. The check sat in front of me, crisp, folded neatly, radiating irony. That stupid lottery ticket I tossed into an envelope as a sarcastic farewell. It had turned into a jackpot. A poetic twist in a story that had been filled with betrayal, humiliation, and control games. And now? Now I had a cashier's check worth more than what Lena had begged for in alimony. I couldn't stop smiling. When I got back to the office, Jan, my assistant, looked up from her desk, raised an eyebrow, and smirked. "You look like the cat who just ate the canary," she said. "Was lunch that good?" I gave her a little nod. Let's just say, Karma finally got the memo. She laughed and went back to her emails, unaware of the storm that had just passed and the strange reward it had left in its wake. By then, Nina had already stepped away from her role as my assistant. Officially, she'd moved on to a personal project. In truth, that project was painting the guest bedroom in my house, soon to be the nursery. Twins were on the way. 2 perfect, unexpected reminders that life doesn't stop for heartbreak. It just makes room for something better. We'd taken our time. We hadn't rushed into anything physical until the divorce was final, and when we finally let it happen, it felt earned. Honest. Nina wasn't just my assistant anymore. She was my partner, my future. Still, that didn't mean everything was tied up in a neat little bow. Lena wasn't completely gone from my life, at least not yet. I'd heard rumors she tried reconciling with Terrence. He shot her down. Then she floated from couch to couch, staying with friends who didn't really want her there. Eventually, she landed back at her parents' house, humiliated, broke, and bitter. And she still had 2 years, or less, depending on how desperate she got, to collect that measly $100 a week in alimony. Frankly, if she found a new sucker to marry her and spare me the last of that obligation, I'd be the first to send a wedding gift. I never responded to her final string of texts. The last one read, "I thought you'd always love me." I didn't reply, because the truth is, I had loved her. Once. The kind of love that builds homes, plans futures, and forgives mistakes that should never be forgiven. But that love had died. Piece by piece. Lie by lie. By the time she walked out of my life, I didn't love her. I didn't even hate her. I just didn't care anymore. And that, I realized, was the most powerful kind of freedom. Now, with the court battles over, the locks changed, and the nursery taking shape upstairs, I could finally breathe. Nina would sometimes catch me standing in the doorway of that room, watching her paint little clouds and stars on the wall, a quiet smile on her face. She never asked what I was thinking. She didn't need to. She knew. She had watched me fight through the wreckage, watched me hold the line when I wanted to lash out, watched me dismantle Lena's manipulations, not with anger, but with strategy. She once told me, most men would have lost their mind. You kept yours. And in the end, you won. Maybe I did. But I didn't feel like a man who won something. I felt like a man who survived something. There's a difference. Victory tastes sweet. Survival? It tastes clean. It's the air after a thunderstorm. The silence after a courtroom slams its final gavel. It's waking up in the middle of the night and realizing you're not angry anymore. You're just done. I framed that lottery check, by the way. Didn't cash it. Didn't need to. I hung it in the garage, right above my workbench, where Lena once screamed at me for wasting too much time with tools and sawdust. Now, every time I build something with my hands, I look up and remember. What she tried to tear down, I rebuilt better. With patience, with precision, and with no more lies under my roof. As for Lena, she became a story I tell sometimes. Not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but because people need to hear what happens when you don't react in rage. You respond with calculation. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply becoming untouchable. Looking back, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, it's the sharpest weapon you can carry. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I planned. I adapted. I waited. In a world that rushes to react, there's real power in patience and clarity. For those of us who've lived long enough to see the cracks in people, the lesson is simple. You don't have to burn down the bridge to walk away. You just have to know when to stop crossing it. To anyone in their later chapters, like me, let me say this. Your dignity is worth protecting, no matter your age. Heartbreak doesn't care if you're 30 or 60, but neither does healing. If someone betrays your trust, let them go, and don't chase closure. You don't need to win every argument. Sometimes, peace is found in letting the truth speak for itself. And above all, don't let bitterness take root. Rebuild. Reinvent. Whether you're starting over in your 40s or your 70s, life isn't finished with you yet. The second half of your life can be the strongest chapter, if you write it on your own terms.